Hello students, welcome to this third session on T.S. Eliot's essay Tradition and Individual Talent. In the previous session, we had a discussion about T.S. Eliot's concept of tradition, that how he has elaborated upon this very fact that a poet, a creative artist cannot be judged in isolation, and he does not have his complete meaning alone. He has to be compared and contrasted with the older and the earlier writers, and he must be placed among them. So, tradition for Eliot consists of both the past and the present. There is a mutual interdependence. There is a reciprocal relationship between the present and the past, because past modifies the present and the present alters the past. But when a new work of art is created, it inevitably modifies the tradition. According to Eliot, new work causes a readjustment in values and relationships of the already existing work. So, in brief, for Eliot, literary tradition plays an important role in the poetic process, and he is not looking at tradition as something static. He explains tradition as something forever changing, growing, and evolving. A sense of tradition implies a changing relationship with the past which is constantly being altered as new works are added to it. And in this way, in this very essay, Eliot has opened up his discussion about the poetic process with the concept of tradition, and in the concept of tradition he has made it clear that how every poet or every creative artist is related with the poetic tradition or the literary tradition. And the second important relationship with reference to poetic process which Eliot has discussed in this remarkable essay is the relation of the poet with the poem. And in the relationship of the poet with the poem lies his theory of impersonal poetry. As in the previous session, we had also discussed that when we are trying to analyze the work of a particular creative artist, he is not to be judged alone. He is to be judged in the line of a particular tradition which he has imbibed and which he has altered according to the requirements of his own time, according to the requirements of the present. So, in this process of being related with the literary tradition, with the poetic tradition, it's quite clear that according to T.S. Eliot, a poet cannot write in a vacuum. Poetry is explained as a living whole of all the poetry that has ever been written. And the progress of an artist is a continual self-sacrifice, a continual extension of personality. Here in the very first section of the essay, where he has explained his theory of tradition, he has made it very clear that a poet's relationship with the past, a poet's relationship with the literary tradition involves a self-surrender to something which is of greater value than himself. He has to surrender himself to literary tradition. So in this way, an artist is continually engaged in the extinction of his own personality. He has to depersonalize himself. He has to be objective, and in this process of depersonalization and its relation to the sense of tradition, he talks about poet's personality as a medium, as a finally perfected medium. According to T.S. Eliot, I quote that poet is being a more finely perfected medium in which special or very varied feelings are at liberty to enter into new combinations. So here he is talking about that the poet is a mature sort of being, is a mature poet, and that mature poet means that he is a finely perfected medium, means the poet's personality is a medium. So it is able to receive various feelings and allow these to enter into different combinations. So to allowing certain feelings to get connected, get presented in the form of different combinations, a poet has to leave his subjectivity. He has to be objective in his approach, like a scientist. And so in this way, Eliot's view is that the poetry is devoid of poet's personality. And the poetry which is created in this process is not having any imprint of the poet's personality. And he compares the poet with a catalyst in a chemical reaction. T.S. Eliot has given an analogy between the poetic process and the chemical reaction. He says that in the poetic process is like a chemical reaction, and in this chemical reaction what happens, that on one hand there is sulfur oxide, on other hand there is oxygen, and both these gases are brought to combine and form something new in the presence of a filament of platinum. And what is that something new is created as sulfuric acid, and in this sulfuric acid is created just because of the presence of the catalyst platinum. So here he says that the sulfur dioxide and oxygen, they are playing the role of feeling and emotions, and those very feeling and emotions are getting concentrated to create new combinations, and those new combinations have taken place in the mind of the poet only, but they do not bear any imprint of the poet's mind, because here the sulfuric acid is there, but sulfuric acid is not having any part of platinum. So at the same time, the piece of platinum, however, doesn't undergo any change itself. It also remains unaffected. So the poet's mind is like a catalyst. The poet's mind brings about new combinations of emotions, but itself remains unaffected by these changes. The combination contains nothing of the poet's personality, just as the sulfuric acid contains no platinum. So the better the artist, the more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers and the mind which creates. The man suffers or goes through certain experiences. It is the poet's mind which creates something new out of those experiences. So the personal emotion and artistic emotion are two different things. So it is not the personality of the poet which is expressed in his poetry. The mind digests and transmutes the passions which are the material for poetry. Here Eliot implies that in art there is not the chaotic emotions and passions which are to be found in life, but an ordering of these emotions is there. So he differentiates the personal emotion with the artistic emotion. So something personal has to be transformed into something of wider validity in this. Here in this combination of new experiences, new emotions, Eliot has emphasized on the intensity of poetic process, and he believes that it is not the intensity of the components but the intensity of the poetic process that makes a poem great. Sublimity depends upon, according to T.S. Eliot, I quote, the intensity of the artistic process and the pressures under which the fusion takes place, unquote. So it is the intensity under which the poetic process takes place that gives rise to a great poetry, and there is an absolute difference between art and life, as it has been made clear earlier that Eliot differentiates personal emotion from poetic emotion. So there is fusion of various elements and an organization of diverse feelings. For example, in Keats' Ode to Nightingale is not really about Nightingale. The nightingale merely serves as an image which brings together certain feelings which one notes and are not directly evoked by the nightingale itself. So the point is that the poet has no personality to express. He is merely a medium in which impressions and experiences combine in peculiar and unexpected ways. Here, this theory of impersonal poetry, Eliot's theory of impersonal poetry, or Eliot's emphasis on the intensity of poetic process is in direct contrast to Wordsworth's emphasis on the intensity of emotions. His theory is considered to be an attack on the romantic notion of poetry that was given by Wordsworth, that poetry is emotions recollected in tranquility, or poetry is a spontaneous overflow of feelings. According to T.S.Eliot, there may be impressions, there may be experiences which are important to a man in a personal sense, but they may not find any direct place in his poetry. And similarly, there may be experiences which become important in his poetry and negligible as far as the man and his personality is concerned. So what Eliot implies is that when a critic has to look at poetry as it is, a poem cannot be great if one needs some biographical information about its author in order to appreciate it. Because poetry is not turning loose of emotion, it is an escape from emotion. It is not the expression of personality, but it is an escape from personality. Here, Eliot rejects that, as I have mentioned earlier, the theory of poetry given by Wordsworth. And according to Eliot, that there is neither emotion nor tranquility in the poetic process is needed. There is only a concentration of a number of experiences. He is not looking at the intensity of emotions, he is pointing towards, or he is emphasizing the concentration of a number of experiences. From this concentration results a new thing. And further, it is a concentration which does not happen consciously or of deliberation. It is a passive process. But Eliot does not say that the whole poetic process is a passive one. There is a great deal which is not passive, which is conscious, which is deliberate. A good poet knows when and where he should be conscious, and whereas a bad poet is conscious where he should be unconscious. So these errors make him personal. So it is, however, to be remarked that here one thing is to be keep in mind while talking about Eliot's theory of impersonal poetry, that Eliot has not explained the where the poet has to be conscious and where the poet has to be unconscious. And he has just formulated that poetry is to be analyzed or judged as an escape from emotion, as an escape from the personality. Here, he is not denying the personality to the poet. Personality of the poet is there and it matters, but it matters only as a medium. He means that poetry is the universalization of the particular. The personal emotion of the poet is to be depersonalized. It is made into something of wider significance. What matters is how the personal emotions are transmuted into an impersonal work of art. And for this impersonalization, or for this depersonalization, a poet needs tradition. And in the end of the essay, keeping in discussion the difference between personal emotion and artistic emotion, Eliot ends his essay with the reiterated view that the emotion of a work of art is impersonal, and he says that the a poet's particular emotions may be simple, may be flat, but that very emotion, when it gets expressed in the form of poetry, it is a complex thing, and this complexity is just there because of the concentration of concentrated combinations. So Eliot is emphasizing intensity of process. He is emphasizing the concentration of emotions, not the intensity of emotions. His interest is in the intensity of artistic process. And when he says that the emotion of the art is impersonal, he says that the poet needs to surrender himself completely to the work which he has to do if he is to reach this impersonality. So the poet would be conscious of what is to be done only if he is aware of the living tradition. So the fact that past lives on in the present and that the present modifies the past. And he has just in the concluding part of the section of the essay, Eliot has just clearly mentioned his view. He says, I quote, "The emotion of art is impersonal, and the poet cannot reach this impersonality without surrendering himself wholly to the work to be done." So here I just repeat that this is how the poet depersonalizes himself through his connections with the literary tradition. I'll re-explain the very thing, that according to T.S. Eliot, the poet would be conscious of what is to be done only if he is aware of the living tradition, and the fact that the past lives on in the present and that present modifies the past. So this is how Eliot insists that poet should subject his personal self to the discipline of absorbing literary tradition. And this theory of impersonal poetry had a great deal to impact the further criticism, and it questioned basically the existing ideas, and it gave a fresh direction to thought as it went against existing concept. As I have earlier made it clear to you, the existing romantic concept of poetry, it has been called a revolutionary theory of poetry, the greatest theory on the nature of the poetic process after the romantic theory put forward by Wordsworth. And the Romantics considered poetry to be the expression of personal emotions and the very personality of the poet, and this concept is firmly rejected by Eliot. He considers poetry to be not the letting loose of emotion but an escape from emotion. It is not the expression of personality but an escape from personality. Here I just want to repeat to make things more clear to you people, that it is not, as Wordsworth stated, a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings or emotions recollected in tranquility. Eliot, however, doesn't deny personality or emotion to the poet. He merely demands that a man who feels or experiences, that is, the poet's personality, be separate from the artist's mind which creates. The personal feelings and emotions of the man in the poet should be changed into the artistic emotion, something which is universal and impersonal. Thus, in Eliot's view, the man and the poetry are two different things. So, this is all about Eliot's revolutionary theory of poetry that is known as impersonal theory, and which according to which this theory, poetry is a matter of organization, poetry is a matter of arrangement rather than a matter of inspiration, because Eliot looks at poet's mind as a storehouse, as a receptacle. Into this receptacle, all sort of emotion and disparate experiences come together. So this is all about T.S. Eliot's theory of impersonal poetry. Thank you.